Well, the past few Torah portions, it's focused on the building of the tabernacle, right? And all the various furnishings and things that go along with that. But if you remember, the goal of all of that, the goal of the tabernacle has always been to prepare a place so that he could dwell within or in the midst of his people. All of these specifics, all of these different constructions, all of those types of things, it's always had that goal and that purpose in mind. When we talk about the tent of meeting, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, our Creator says this. He says, there I will meet with you, to speak with you there. I will meet with Bnei Israel there, so it will be sanctified by my glory. And so I will sanctify the tent of meeting and the altar. I will also sanctify Aaron and his sons to minister to me as Kohanim, as priests. So I will dwell among Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, and be their God. That is his goal. It's something that he has always wanted. The ability, to share his life with those that he has created, those that he loves. He wants to build a house, to live and dwell with us. And that truth is, if you remember, that truth is revealed in the very first letter of the very first word or the very first verse of the Scriptures. That's that word up here, Bereshit. In the beginning. The first letter is the Beit. And it has that picture of what? It's a picture of a house. The first letter of the first word has the foundation, has a roof and a structure with an open door of welcome and hospitality. That's been the heart of God from the very beginning. It's not supposed to be a house of one. A house represents the building of a family. How many of y'all remember a song from maybe the 90s Christian music? It's a big, big house, right? Anybody know that one? How's it go? With lots and lots of room, right? We talked about a couple of weeks ago with the table of the showbread. It's a bread representing each of the tribes, how that is set up like a banquet hall before the king, where there's this big, big table with what? How's the song go? Lots and lots of food, right? So no accident that we're having oneg today. Or as Yeshua says, we looked at this in Matthew chapter 8, verse 11, where those are coming from the east and the west, and they will recline at the table with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob in the kingdom. That's been his heart all the time, is having a home, and it's filled with family and gathering together and celebrating together. A house with a family, a relationship between God and his people with that covenant, the Ketubah of marriage between husband and wife. The passage that we looked at earlier in Jeremiah with the new or the renewed covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, where God describes his actions in terms of a husband. He says, for they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. So a house, a marriage, a family, children, if you don't understand how those work within the biblical culture, within the biblical framework, you'll miss out on so much of how God is working and how God is operating in the Scriptures. One thing I noticed about this Torah portion, Ki Tisa, is that it has a lot of great marital advice. It demonstrates how a healthy marriage operates, and it lets you see even what an unhealthy relationship looks like through the context and the conduct of worship. So, in this Torah portion, this is describing a healthy marriage in many ways. And when you look at an unhealthy relationship, look over at Exodus 32. Right Moses, he has gone up on the mountain for the 40 days, and they're starting to wonder, is he coming back? There's this fear, there's this insecurity, and it's caused people to think that they've been abandoned by Moses and abandoned by God. And the enemy takes advantage of all of that. He takes advantage of that fear, and he entices them to break covenant with God out of that fear and insecurity. I mean, that's not unique to the nation, is it? Doesn't he do that within our marriages, where he uses our fears and our insecurities to try to break us up? He says, now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said to him, get up and make us gods who will go before us. And as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. This is that fear. That's that insecurity, and it has destroyed many marriages. And it causes people to look around. Maybe we need somebody new. Maybe we need somebody else, a replacement. Make us gods that we can see, that we can touch. When you look at the Targum of this passage, that Aramaic translation, it says, the way they describe it, it fills it in with a little extra commentary. But it talks about that even Satan, the accuser, came and he makes an appearance in this moment. Satan takes their fear and he entices even their pride. And well, maybe I don't need him anyway. We don't need that Moses guy. They can have any lover that they want. In the Targum, the Aramaic translation, it puts it like this. It says, when they saw that the time he had appointed to them had passed, so Moses was like, hey, I'm going to be back at this point. It says, and they for whatever it's Satana, but Satan had come and caused them to err and perverted their hearts with pride. Later on in verse 19, it says, and it was when Moshe came near the camp and saw the calf and the instruments of music in the hands of the wicked, who were dancing and bowing before it, and Satan, among them, dancing and leaping before the people, the wrath of Moses, was suddenly kindled. So in that celebration, in that party, in that time of worship, and bowing down before the golden calf, Satan was right there among them, even with all the music playing. Right? So can even Satan inhabit the worship of people who think that they're worshiping God? Sure he can. You'll remember, it says that the anger, the wrath of Moses was suddenly kindled. You'll remember, God was initially very angry at this, what was going on, at this betrayal. He is, after all, a jealous God. Jealous for the love and exclusivity of his people. They're not supposed to have any other gods, no other husbands in that respect besides him. And this Torah portion talks about that in chapter 34. He says, for you are to bow down to no other God, because Adonai is jealous for his name. He is a jealous God. Godly jealousy is a good thing. There is an appropriate protective jealousy that exists between a husband and a wife, right? Can we as human beings turn that good thing into a bad thing? Can we take jealousy and make it destructive? Oh yes, we sure can. Everything God gives that is good, we can corrupt and make into something bad. Most often when we see things, especially when it's destructive, we are jealous for things, we are jealous for people that we really don't have a claim to. We don't really have a covenant relationship with. But appropriate jealousy is protective of a rightly established relationship, of a covenant of marriage, that ketubah that is there. As Shaul, the Apostle Paul, put in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he says, for I am jealous over you with a godly jealousy. For I betrothed you to one husband, to present you to Messiah. as a pure virgin, with no other connections, with no other commitments, with no other loyalties besides him and him alone. That's the kind of faith that Paul was trying to build in the people at Corinth. Did they have other options in Corinth? Oh yeah. That was a hotbed of pagan idolatry and worship. They could have gone and worshiped anybody and anything. And they had most of them. But he says, look, all of that's gone. You've been betrothed to one husband. God got angry about this, but then Moses gets angry. Moses, who had, kind of talked down and calmed down God's anger, but when he sees it for himself, that righteous indignation, that godly jealousy, he becomes angry. And as the Targum describes it, with Satan, dancing around the golden calf with all the people, we need to understand what role he's kind of playing. He's essentially acting like the ex-boyfriend or the ex-husband, ex-wife, who's trying to get his ex back. Because remember, they've been delivered out of Egypt. They've been delivered out of that idolatry. And he wants to get what was taken from him back. It's kind of a good marital advice. It's good rule that if an ex sends you a friend request on Facebook, is it a good idea to accept that? No. Not really. And I would say don't accept it. It's also a good rule not to go looking for your ex on Facebook or any other type of platform, because your memory and that nostalgia are not always reliable guides for such moments. You'll remember all the good things and not the bad, and you'll think, well, maybe you had it better. Maybe, you ate better. Maybe you weren't dying out here in your current circumstances like out in the desert. And maybe it really was better back in Egypt. Isn't that the whole conversation they were having from time to time? Even when you look at chapter 34, verse 15, when they're talking about, clearing out the people. I don't have that one up here. But he says, see that you do not make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land. Otherwise, when they prostitute themselves with their gods and sacrifice to their gods, someone is going to invite you. You're going to get an invitation to join in. And you will eat from their sacrifice. Do not take their daughters for your sons, for their daughters will prostitute themselves with their own gods and cause your sons to prostitute themselves with their gods. Right? You're not supposed to go looking for what you came out of. The Israelites could easily forget how they had been rescued and delivered from Egypt, how they had crossed over and they had left all the gods of Egypt behind, those defeated gods of Egypt. They had forgotten, some of them did, that their ex was bad, that their ex was abusive and really had no legal right or claim over them. I mean, why would they want to go back? But yet some do. Instead, the enemy, the ex, he tries to undermine God. He tries to undermine his covenant relationship with the people. And so he wants to mix in. It's like, hey, don't forget about what we used to do. He wants to mix in the old way of doing things, the old worship with this new faith. That little nostalgia to mix some of the profane with the holy. Aaron, he takes this offering from them. He says he received from their hand, and he made a molten calf, and fashioned it with a chiseling tool. And then they said, this is your God, Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. That golden calf sure probably looked and felt familiar, very similar to what they knew back in Egypt. Sure, they tried to identify the calf with the true God, the one that had delivered them. They tried to call it by the right name. But the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that wasn't him. He didn't look anything like that. It's proof of a rocky relationship if your husband or your wife, and they go away on a trip for a while, but while they're gone, you forget what they look like. Is that a bad sign? That's like, man, who was that person again? I can't remember exactly what they look like. I mean, how bad would it be if you're supposed to go and to pick up your spouse at the airport? Y'all seen those kind of moments where people are holding up the sign with the name on it or some other type of thing? And you're holding up the sign after that long trip, and you're standing there holding up their sign, and some random person getting off the plane says, "Oh, hey, honey, it's time. Let's go home." And you aren't sure whether that's the right person or not. It's like, okay, did you get a haircut? I don't know, something's different about you, but I can't quite put my finger on it. I mean, that's not the way it's supposed to go, right? You should be sure what your husband looks like, even when they shave their beard and it comes in looks like a totally different person, right? You should still know who that person is. And after all they had seen and heard from God, the Israelites still didn't know how to recognize their husband. This is a situation of mistaken identity, intentionally. Satan is going to try to intentionally put himself in that position of God. And he'll dress it up to fool all sorts of people. Can you imagine what it would be like if your ex snuck into your home or your apartment and they changed out all of the pictures that you have with your spouse and they put the pictures of you and your ex, right? Should you notice? I should hope so, right? You should notice, wait a minute, something is different. That's not the one I thought I married. So marriage advice, always remember what your husband or wife looks like. Remember their identity so you don't mistake someone else for them. Because in the days that are coming, it's going to be hard to tell. When it comes to our walk with God, when it comes to who He is and what the world is claiming of Him, right? There's going to be a lot of things said, there's going to be a lot of things done, all in His name, and it's going to be hard to tell which one is the truth. Right? We know that's coming. So we need to know the real thing so well that we can recognize the counterfeit. We don't want to mistake anybody else for our true marriage. Some additional marital advice in all of this. Remember, it's important to remember dates. Those annual dates like anniversaries or birthdays. Anybody ever gotten in trouble with that? You forgot your anniversary? For your own safety, say no. No, they've never happened, right? But if you want to remember those annual dates, anniversaries, and birthdays, you don't want to try to fake it, and you certainly don't want to try to make up a new anniversary to cover the fact that you forgot the real one. Right? Celebrating a random date not relevant to your marriage, I'll say that's not a good time either. But again, what happens here? Exodus 32, verse 5. When Aaron saw it, that golden calf, he built an altar before it. Then Aaron made a proclamation saying, well, tomorrow, some random day on the calendar, will be a feast to Adonai. And they rose up early the next morning, sacrificed burnt offerings, and brought fellowship offerings. The people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to make merry. Aaron is making up a new festival on the spot. It's the word Chag in the Hebrew. And I don't think it's an accident that the text calls this the Chag instead of a Moed. Right? What's a Moed? Moed is an appointed time, right? A set time. It implies that somebody does the setting, right? Who has the authority to appoint the time? Does Aaron have that authority? No, he does not. The moed belongs to who? belongs to the Lord. It belongs to Adonai. So the important dates for your relationship, for your marriage, are set and cannot be changed. It's not a good idea to try to change the date of your anniversary. Just so you know, if anybody's wondering, it's not a good idea to say, honey, I think we need to celebrate our anniversary on a different day this year. And this Torah portion goes into the setting of the anniversaries. Exodus 34 says, you are to keep the feast of matzot, unleavened bread. For 7 days you are to eat the matzot, as I commanded you, at the time appointed in the month of Aviv, for in the month of Aviv you came out of Egypt. Isn't that what's next? Right? Do we have an anniversary coming up in the next month? Yes, we do. He says, you are to observe the feast of Shavuot in verse 22, which is the first fruits of the wheat harvest, as well as the feast of ingathering at the turn of the year. The feast of ingathering is talking about what? Tabernacles, right? In the fall. He says, 3 times during the year all your males are to appear before Adonai Elohim, the God of Israel. Those are the set days of these pilgrimage feasts, these 3 pilgrimage feasts, when the unleavened bread, the Feast of Weeks, what we typically call Pentecost. Shortly after that, and then there's tabernacles, when we celebrate essentially. In tabernacles, are we not celebrating? Isn't it supposed to be a picture of all of us living together? Living in a place, in a home together as the people of God. So these feast days are a lot like those annual reminders of relationship, like a wedding anniversary, like a birthday. Special moments and places are a part of all of these things, like your where you first met or your first date, right? All of those things help define that relationship that you have. They separate it, they distinguish it from every other relationship. But the enemy, your ex, the seducer, doesn't want you to do those dates. He wants you to pull you back into some other dates or other wilder, more indulgent memories, perhaps. I wouldn't be surprised if this date that Aaron is talking about, where he says tomorrow is going to be a feast to the Lord, I wouldn't be surprised if that date was something significant to the enemy, maybe something on the Egyptian calendar, a day Satan used to have his own celebrations on. Kind of like remembering an anniversary from a previous relationship, a previous marriage. How good would it be, gentlemen, to show up with an anniversary card on the wrong day because that was the day that you remembered from the past one? Would you be in trouble? Slightly, ladies, slightly in trouble? Big time in trouble. Which is it? I think big time in trouble would be the case. The enemy wanted to celebrate like they used to. The enemy wanted to take them to their favorite restaurant. Reenact their first date. Do their favorite activity and do it all on the wrong day. See, doing this made the Israelites, when Aaron made that golden calf, when they had a festival to the Lord on that day that he makes up, it makes Israelites no different than all the other nations, because that's the way everybody else was doing things. It's what marks their worship. It marks their walk with their gods. See, there are supposed to be elements of our relationship, of our marriage to God, that should be exclusive to Him and only to Him. We don't mix other days or other practices. We don't co-opt those other days or those other practices and claim that it honors our marriage to Him. So good marital advice: remember your anniversary, those other yearly reminders. And don't try to substitute other ones that don't belong. But a marriage needs more than just yearly reminders, doesn't it? I just hope that you don't rejoice in your relationship one day a year. I hope you don't tell her you love her, gentlemen, just once a year on those special days. You don't do that, do you? Please tell me nobody does that where you only tell her you love her one day a year. For your own safety, once again, just say no. But many marriage counselors, they'll say to you men, who we often sadly don't have enough of a clue, they'll say, don't stop going out on a date with your wife. Right? Anybody heard that kind of advice before? If it's new to you, just nod and say, yes, I'll be sure and do that. All right? Have that time set aside for just the two of you if that's possible. Date, those kind of things should happen a lot more frequently than your anniversary, right? Just nod your head if you're confused. Yes. Those should happen a lot more often than your anniversary. If possible, try to do things like that weekly. There's been many times in our own marriage, my own marriage with Vicki, that we've not been able to do it every week, or not been able to afford it, or not had somebody to watch the kids. There's so many reasons why we can't do it this week, right? Y'all have had those conversations before, right? What is Shabbat supposed to be? Shabbat is like that weekly time, that weekly date for a healthy marriage. That's one reason why it's so vital, one cause for why Shabbat is supposed to be the most common, the most frequently seen sign of that covenant relationship. Exodus 31, he says, Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak now to the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, saying, Surely you must keep my Shabbatot. For it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, so you may know that I am Adonai who sanctifies you, who sets you apart. Therefore you are to keep the Shabbat, because it is holy for you. Verse 16, it says, So Bnei Israel is to keep the Shabbat, to observe and guard the Shabbat throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and Bnei Israel forever. For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he ceased from work and rested. The Shabbat is a sign, it's a mark, it's a signal that sets God's people apart from everybody else. Otherwise, without this, you just kind of blend in and you lose your distinctiveness. Entering into covenant with him means agreeing to meet him. To meet your husband in this case, God at a specific, on a specific day, at your favorite restaurant, a specific restaurant on a specific day for a date every week. Now, if you have that kind of arrangement set up between you and your wife, or you and your husband, is it good for your marriage if you decide on your own to show up even to the same restaurant just on a different day or a different time? Is that a good idea for your marriage? Not really. It's as if you're going to meet somebody else and not your spouse. Instead, Shabbat is supposed to be that special time. It's going back to creation. On the seventh, he made heaven and earth. He set the pattern of these things. It's restoring that time. It's supposed to be a picture of that time where he walks with his creation in the cool of the day, as in the garden. And, it's no wonder that the further we get away, the more people reject creation, the more people reject that God actually made this world and this universe. The more people that reject that, the more also means the more people reject the Sabbath and the Shabbat. And it actually enhances and grows your belief and that security in the creation, the closer that you get to understanding what Shabbat is really all about. Shabbat is supposed to be a blessing, not a curse. It's supposed to be that special and unique time. It's connected to creation again. It's connected to the Exodus, to our redemption. It's connected to our future. and the promise of that kingdom, that Sabbath rest that is to come, as Hebrews 4 talks about. When you look at the the blessing for the Shabbat that's in some of these Sidurs, this is what it says. It says, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us in his commandments and taken delight in us." Right? It's a special time that he delights in. In love and favor, he gave us his holy Shabbat as an inheritance. Inheritance is about the future, right? That's what's coming. A remembrance of the act of creation. For it is the first of holy convocation, a remembrance of the exodus from Egypt. You have our past, you have our redemption, you have our future. In all of that, he says, "For you chose us and sanctified us from all the nations and gave us your holy Shabbat as an inheritance in love and in favor." And then, "Blessed are you, Adonai, who sanctifies the Shabbat." Something that struck me, and I might have shared this at least once before, but it's been a while. Do y'all realize that Adam and Eve's first full day of existence was what? It's the Shabbat. Adam was created, at the pinnacle of all of those land animals and those land creatures that were created on day 6, right? So other things are created before Adam comes on the scene. And then there's a time where Adam was alone on that day, and then Eve was created, but it's also on day 6, right? So Adam wasn't around for all of day 6, and neither was she. So their first full day together was on Shabbat, and they were with God. That whole day. They had nothing else that they had to worry about, nothing else that they had to be responsible for. They were just with him. And it's on those special days. I mean, we don't want to take that away from our relationship with God, do we? We don't want to take that special day away from each other. It's on those special weekly, times, weekly dates that we really get to know him. It's when we really get to know his ways and what kind of life that he has for us. It's in fulfillment of Moses' request in this Torah portion, and it's also in fulfillment of the counsel of the apostles. Moses, when he was up on the mountain in this section, he says, "Now then I pray, if I have found grace in your eyes." Grace was always there, even in the Old Testament. Amen? "If I have found grace in your eyes," he says, "show me your ways so that I may know you, so that I might find favor in your sight." To know his ways, his walk, his halakha, in which he wants us to live our lives and conduct ourselves by faith, that's how we know him. It reveals his heart. It reveals his character. And so it's good marital advice. You should deliberately intend to want to know, to seek to know your spouse's ways, your spouse's preferences, and sometimes you may have to ask. But then you have to remember it. Then you have to live it. And that's his favor. In our case today, in terms of knowing God, we seek, we learn, we see his ways. We learn all of that from his word, from the Torah, from the whole Tanakh, from the apostolic writings. All Scripture, Paul talks about in 2 Timothy, is what? It's God-breathed, and it's useful for teaching, for reproof, for restoration, for training in righteousness. So anybody who is claiming to be in relationship with him needs to start with seeking to know him and his ways, to not neglect any part of it. And it should change our lives. It should change, the day we worship, because we are set apart to do something different than the nations. It should change the way we worship. It should change even the food that we eat at times. The apostles in Acts chapter 15 had the same attitude and desire that Moses did, not just for themselves, but for all who came to know the Father through Messiah. They were having this debate about the Gentiles. How are these from the nations, how are they going to be brought into this nation and shown to be in covenant, in exclusive marriage relationship with our God? James, or Jacob, answered, "Brothers, listen to me." This is after Peter had shared some things. "Simon has described how God first showed his concern by taking from the Gentiles a people for his name. The words of the prophets agree, as it's written, 'After this I will return and rebuild the fallen tabernacle of David. I will rebuild its ruins, and I will restore it, so that the rest of humanity may seek the Lord.'" Not just the Jewish nation itself, but all of humanity, namely all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says Adonai, who makes these things known from old. He says, "Therefore I judge not to trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to God, but to write to them to abstain from the contamination of idols, from sexual immorality, from what is strangled, and from blood." And this is where we know and are shown his ways. "For Moses from ancient generations has had in every city those who proclaim him, since he is read in all the synagogues every Shabbat." So where does he expect all those Gentiles to be? On what day? Hearing what? Or from who? Hearing from Moses. These believers in Yeshua, this is where they're going to be. This is their weekly appointment. This is their weekly date with their new bridegroom. So even Gentiles were invited to this weekly meeting so they could learn his ways, so they could participate in that covenant of promise. And it's at this meeting that we are shown and we learn his ways and therefore know him. Some good marital advice in all of this is, don't enter into a marriage if you are unwilling to change anything about yourself or your way of life. If you think you've got it all figured out and you think nothing about you is going to need any adjustments, good luck. We don't do luck, though. We talked about that earlier. Don't enter into a marriage if you are unwilling to change anything about yourself or your way of life. You'll have to adjust yourself to the dynamics of this new life together. In this case, when God is your husband, if you're changing yourself to be in better relationship with God, is that good for you? Are you the better person for that? Yes, you are. And on the flip side to that advice, don't marry somebody if your first thought is how you want to change them into someone completely different than the person that you met. If first thing you want to do is, change what they look like into a golden calf, or change what day you meet together on as, tomorrow is going to be a feast of the Lord. In this case, when God is your husband, think about it like this. When God is your husband, if anybody needs to change, who's it going to be in this relationship? It's definitely going to be me. It's definitely going to be us. We Gentiles made the mistake throughout our history of thinking that we can show up into this relationship, into these covenants of promise. We showed up and started making changes to everything. No, we don't really get to do that. Some things are set in this relationship, set by him. Those yearly anniversaries, those weekly special times of meeting. But even then, there's more. We have those yearly reminders and those moments. We have those weekly special times together. But surely you don't talk to your spouse only once a week. Right? Husbands, I hope you don't tell her you love her only once a week. So what is from the yearly to the weekly to the daily? What is our daily relationship like? Isn't that what prayer is supposed to be? Isn't prayer our opportunity to talk with your spouse, to tell them that you love them, tell them about what's going on in your day? And if you're smart, you'll do that more than once a day, several times a day. That's why the previous Torah portion ended with that altar of incense, the smoke of which, as it is going up before the throne of God, what is that supposed to represent? It's supposed to represent the prayer of the saints. That's what John tells us in Revelation. Revelation chapter 5 says, when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the Kedoshim, of the saints. And man, it's just so remarkably ironic, or isn't it just completely accidental? Because what goes on in that verse? It says, they are singing a new song, saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you redeemed for God those from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. Didn't we sing about that just a little while ago? That he is worthy? A healthy marriage needs those yearly, those weekly, even those daily reminders and strengtheners of the relationship. They help us to remember our past, our present, and anticipate our future. And they also intentionally, purposefully exclude anybody else from it. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Because nobody else is supposed to have your anniversary. Nobody else is supposed to have the same experiences that you did of how you met or your first date. No one else has our weekly date, the ways our husband helps us to recognize him. That's all supposed to be exclusive to our walk with God. That's something that the Targums also help with. When you look at Exodus 33 in the Targum, it says, and he said, thou canst not see forgive again the language, the visage of my face, for no man can see me and abide alive. And the Lord said, behold, a place is prepared. This is how we grow in our understanding of our recognizing who our bridegroom is. A place is prepared before me, and thou shalt stand upon the rock, and it shall be that when the glory of my Shekinah passeth before thee, I will put thee in a cavern of the rock, and I will overshadow thee with my word until the time that I have passed by. If you've been here recently, you'll remember that the Targums also often speak of the word as the presence, as the fullness of the manifestation of God. You know, the Apostle John understood the word, understood that idea of logos in the same way as the Targums do. Not like Greek philosophy. You know, when he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and all things were made through him, and apart from him, nothing was made that has come into being. The Word covers and protects Moses at the same time that his glory, his Shekinah of God is passing by. The Word is also who we meet with on Shabbat in the Targums, who we sit down to our weekly date with according to the Targums. Look at it how it puts it like this, that Exodus 31. And the Lord spake with Moshe, saying, also speak thou with the sons of Israel, saying, ye shall keep the day of my Sabbaths, indeed, for it is a sign between my word and you. Now, isn't that interesting? That you may know that I am the Lord who sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy to you. In verse 16, the sons of Israel shall therefore keep the Sabbath to perform the delightful exercises of the Sabbath. That's what it's supposed to be. For your generations as an everlasting statute between who? Between my word and the sons of Israel, it is a sign forever. For in the 6 days the Lord created and perfected the heavens and the earth, and in the 7th day he rested and refreshed. And the Word, what happened to that Word in verse 14 in John? And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, tabernacled among us. The Shabbat is a sign, it's evidence of our relationship with the Word, who was God and is God. When we remove Shabbat from our faith, we are damaging our relationship with who? With the Word. We're showing up for date night on a different night, maybe at a different restaurant. We're eating different food. It's no wonder then that we might bump into and end up having dinner with our ex and end up in spiritual idolatry and adultery and going back into Egypt, because that's where he always wants to take us. The ex always wants to take us back into slavery in Egypt. Instead of all that, we need to take the marital advice from this Torah portion and strengthen our relationship with the Word. So when we see the Word, aren't we not seeing the Father? Because he has built a house for us where we can live and as family. Doesn't he say that? In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. That's our relationship with the Word, the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. And all of these things that we may take for granted, all of these things like the yearly appointments, the weekly appointments, the daily times of prayer, all of those are trying to strengthen our relationship with Him so we can recognize Him and not be fooled or seduced by any ex that comes along that tries to take us anywhere else. And this is where the world is going to be. They're going to lose sight of who their bridegroom is. Amen? Let's take this advice and this word for our relationship with our Father.